Extraterrestrial Psychologists Study Human Celebrations. Part 1. Dr. Ara stared at the observation screen with growing concern. The display showed hundreds of humans gathered in a large open space on Earth. They stood in neat rows, their clothing dark and formal. In the center of the gathering, a rectangular box sat draped with a colorful cloth bearing symbolic patterns. The humans had traveled from distant places to attend this event. Many had tears running down their faces. This was normal. The psychologist had witnessed similar rituals across dozens of species. Death brought sorrow. Sorrow required processing. Most species in the galactic community processed grief through silence, isolation, and careful emotional management. The humans appeared to be following the same pattern. Then the music started. Ara's dorsal ridges stiffened in confusion. The humans began to move. Not the slow, measured movements of a mourning procession, but something else entirely. Their feet tapped against the ground in rhythm. Some raised their arms. The ones who had been crying moments before now made sounds that the translator labeled as laughter. The rectangular box, clearly containing their deceased, was lifted onto shoulders, and the entire gathering began to move through the streets of their city. More humans joined from the sides. They played instruments. They danced. They sang. The sorrowful ritual had transformed into something the database could only classify as a celebration. "This cannot be correct," Ara said to her assistant, Sora. The empath stood beside her, tentacles trembling. "Run a diagnostic on the emotional sensors." "I already did," Sora replied, her voice shaking. "3 times. The readings are accurate. They're experiencing joy and sorrow simultaneously. The emotional spectrum shows both in equal measure, somehow existing together without canceling each other out." Ara pulled up more observation files. Her research team had been monitoring Earth for 6 cycles now, and the reports kept piling up with similar anomalies. Humans engaged in this contradictory behavior regularly. They called these events by many names: funerals, memorials, wakes, celebrations of life. Each one followed the same impossible pattern. She opened a file labeled Memorial Day. The date marked a historical remembrance of humans who had died in military conflicts. According to every psychological model in the Galactic Institute's database, such a day should be somber. Species across the galaxy set aside quiet days of reflection for their war dead. They observed such days in complete silence, alone in their dwelling spaces. Humans gathered in parks. They cooked food over open flames. Children ran and played. Adults consumed alcohol and told stories. They laughed. They displayed their national symbols with pride. Some shed tears, yes, but those tears mixed with smiles. The emotional readings made no sense. "Perhaps they've forgotten," suggested Dr. Thane, the team member. "His species processed loss through logical compartmentalization. Maybe humans lack the cognitive capacity to maintain long-term grief." "No," Sora said, her empathic senses more refined than any instrument. "They remember. I can feel it. The sorrow is there, deep and real, but they've done something with it, something I've never encountered before." Ara pulled up another file. This one showed humans gathering around the body of a deceased family member. For 3 days they sat in a home receiving visitors. This ritual the humans called sitting Shiva. Again, the pattern emerged. Yes, there were tears. Yes, there was grief. But there was also food, conversation, and even occasional laughter as visitors shared memories of the deceased. She found recordings of Irish wakes where humans drank and sang songs about the dead person. She found footage of Mexican families decorating graves with bright flowers and having picnics in cemeteries. She found videos of New Orleans jazz funerals where mourners danced through streets behind a casket. Every civilization processed death, but no other species celebrated it. "We need to classify this as a psychological disorder," Thane said. "This is clearly a species-wide maladaptive coping mechanism. They're in denial of their grief." "I don't think they are," Ara said slowly. She had spent decades studying comparative psychology across hundreds of species. Something about this felt different, not wrong, but unknown. Look at the long-term outcomes. Humans don't show higher rates of complicated grief. They don't have elevated psychological dysfunction related to loss. In fact, their recovery patterns are faster than most species we've studied. That's impossible, Thane said flatly. You cannot accelerate grief processing by pretending it doesn't exist. But they're not pretending, Sora insisted. Her tentacles had stopped trembling and now moved in thoughtful patterns. I can feel both emotions from them, true sorrow and true joy at the same time in the same individual. It's like they've created a space inside themselves large enough to hold both. Ara made a decision. Remote observation wasn't enough. The Galactic Psychological Institute needed to understand this phenomenon. If it was a disorder, they needed to offer help. If it was something else, if humans had discovered a new way to process loss, the entire galaxy needed to know. We're going to Earth, she announced. Full cultural immersion study. We'll attend these celebrations ourselves and conduct direct interviews. Thane's feathers ruffled in disapproval. That violates standard observation protocols. Standard protocols don't account for this situation, Ara replied. We're scientists. When we find something that doesn't fit our models, we don't force it to fit. We investigate until we understand. 3 weeks later, the research team arrived on Earth under the guise of cultural exchange scholars. The human government, eager to build relationships with galactic civilizations, welcomed them warmly. They were assigned liaisons, given living spaces in a city called Boston, and provided access to community events. Their first true test came quickly. The elderly human neighbor in their building died. The building manager informed them that there would be a celebration of life in 2 days, and they were invited to attend. Ara prepared her team carefully. Observe everything, record emotional states, take notes on social interactions. Do not judge. We're here to understand, not to impose our own frameworks. The celebration took place in a large room decorated with photographs of the deceased woman. Her name had been, and she had lived 93 Earth years. Humans filled the space, wearing a mixture of dark and bright colors. Soft music played in the background. Ara watched as humans embraced each other. Some cried openly, but then someone would tell a story about, and laughter would ripple through the room. The stories came one after another. Had been a teacher, had made excellent cookies, had a sharp wit, and once said something particularly funny to a grocery store clerk. A young human woman stood before the gathering. Grandma told me something when I was 8 years old, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I had lost my hamster and I was devastated. She said, "Sweetheart, we don't celebrate because we've forgotten the hurt. We celebrate because we remember the love. The joy we share honors what was lost." The room fell silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping and others joined in. The young woman smiled through her tears. Sora's tentacles quivered. "I need to step outside," she whispered. "The emotional intensity is overwhelming." Ara followed her into the hallway. The empath was breathing heavily, her skin shifting through colors that indicated distress. "What did you feel?" Ara asked gently. "Everything," Sora said, "all at once. It was like standing in front of a star. The grief was real and deep, but it was wrapped in something else. Not suppression, not denial, it was transformation. They're taking the sorrow and making it into something they can share, something that connects them instead of isolating them." Ara's mind raced. In culture, grief was private. You experienced it alone, processed it alone, and emerged alone. The idea of shared sorrow was uncomfortable, even taboo, but humans seemed to do the opposite. They gathered their grief together and somehow made it bearable by sharing it. "We need more data," Ara said. "This is just one event. We need to see if this pattern holds across different types of loss, different cultures, different circumstances." Over the following weeks, they attended more human celebrations. A wedding where the bride's deceased father was honored with an empty chair and his favorite song played. A birthday party for a woman turning 50 who joked about aging and mortality while her friends laughed. A retirement celebration where a man cried about losing his career identity, but was surrounded by colleagues who celebrated his years of service. Each event reinforced the pattern. Humans transformed their pain into something else, not by erasing it, but by giving it a different form. They created rituals that acknowledged loss while simultaneously celebrating what had been. Ara compiled her observations into a preliminary report. The Galactic Psychological Institute's response came quickly and was skeptical. They wanted proof. They wanted to see if this was truly beneficial or if humans were simply delaying inevitable psychological collapse. The lead counselor's message was clear. Show us how humans respond to fresh tragedy. Show us this transformation happening in real time, not in established rituals. Then we'll consider that this might be something other than pathology. Ara sat in her temporary Earth home, reading the message again. She needed to witness humans facing new loss, immediate loss, and see if they still reached for celebration. It felt invasive, almost cruel, but it was necessary. She didn't have to wait long. The universe, indifferent to the needs of researchers, provided an answer 3 days later when news broke of a massive earthquake that had struck a human colony on Mars. Part 2. The earthquake hit the Mars colony at 3:47 station time. The habitat domes buckled. Life support systems failed in sectors 3 and 7. By the time rescue teams arrived, 47 humans were dead and over 200 injured. The colony of 5,000 had lost homes, infrastructure, and loved ones in minutes. Ara watched the news coverage with clinical detachment at first. This was the tragedy the Institute had asked for, though she felt uncomfortable thinking of it that way. But science required observation, even of terrible events. She needed to see how humans responded when the wound was fresh and raw. The initial response matched what she expected. Humans cried. They searched frantically through rubble. They carried injured people to medical facilities. Rescue workers moved with desperate efficiency. The emotional readings Sara monitored showed grief, shock, fear, and pain, normal responses to trauma. They're just like any other species right now, Thane observed. The celebration behavior must be a long-term adaptation, not an immediate response. Give them time, Sora said quietly. Her tentacles were still, focused on the emotional data streaming from Mars. I sense something building underneath the grief. It's too early to tell what it is. 3 days after the earthquake, a human named David appeared on the colony's broadcast network. He had lost his husband in the collapse. His face showed the marks of tears and exhaustion, but he stood straight and spoke clearly. We're organizing a gathering, he said. Tomorrow at 1800 hours in the main plaza. Please come. Bring food if you have it. Bring musical instruments. Bring pictures of those we lost. Bring yourselves. We need to be together right now. Ara immediately arranged transportation to Mars. The team arrived within hours, their diplomatic credentials allowing fast passage. The colony officials, overwhelmed and grieving themselves, barely noticed the alien researchers. The main plaza had been partially damaged in the quake, but humans had cleared the debris. They set up tables made from salvaged materials. Someone had strung lights overhead, powered by emergency generators. As the appointed hour approached, humans began to arrive. They came in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups. Many carried dishes of food. Some brought guitars, drums, and other instruments. Children carried drawings and paintings they had made. Adults brought photographs of the deceased, printing them out on whatever paper they could find. Ara positioned herself at the edge of the gathering, recording everything. Sara stood beside her, monitoring the emotional landscape. Thane remained on their ship, insisting that this was inappropriate to witness. David stood on a makeshift platform, His voice cracked as he spoke. 47 of our friends, family, and neighbors died 3 days ago. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that's okay. It's not okay. My heart is broken. I know many of yours are too. Heads nodded throughout the crowd. Several people openly wept. But I also know that my husband would be really angry with me if I spent the rest of my life only being sad. He'd tell me that we honor the dead by living, by remembering them with love, not just sorrow. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to cry, and we're going to laugh, and we're going to be together. Someone in the crowd started singing. Ara's translator identified it as an old Earth song called Lean on Me. Others joined in. The sound grew, hundreds of voices blending together. Many sang through tears, but they sang. Then the food appeared. Humans shared what they had, passing dishes around. Ara watched a woman who had lost her daughter serving soup to a man who had lost his parents. They shared a moment of recognition, of mutual understanding, before the woman moved on to serve others. Stories began to flow. People stood and talked about those who had died. But they didn't just talk about the deaths. They talked about lives, about jokes and quirks and memories, about the time Sarah accidentally ordered 500 kilograms of potatoes instead of 5, about how James sang off-key in the shower every morning, about Maria's terrible cooking that everyone pretended to like. The laughter started small, a chuckle here, a brief smile there, but it grew. Not the manic laughter of denial, but something warmer, the laughter of people remembering joy even while drowning in sorrow. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, approached the platform. She held up a painting. "I made this for Mister," she said. "He taught me math. He's dead now, but I wanted to show everyone how I remember him." The painting showed a stick figure with an enormous smile, surrounded by colorful numbers. The crowd applauded. The girl smiled, then started crying, then smiled again through her tears. Ara felt something crack in her chest. She had spent 40 years studying psychology across the galaxy. She understood emotional regulation, grief processing, and trauma response according to every established model. But this was different. "They're not transforming sorrow into joy," she whispered to Sora. "They're holding both at the same time." "Yes," Sora said. Her voice carried a note of wonder. "They've created a container large enough for contradictory emotions. The celebration doesn't erase the pain. It gives the pain somewhere to exist alongside hope." As the evening progressed, humans began planning. They formed committees to rebuild. They discussed memorial gardens that would bloom in the colonies. They proposed an annual Resilience Day to commemorate both the tragedy and their recovery. Every conversation acknowledged the loss while simultaneously reaching toward the future. One man stood and said something that made Ara finally understand. "My wife died in Sector 7. I loved her for 23 years, and because I loved her, I'm going to live. I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to make sure her death meant something by ensuring this colony survives and thrives. That's how I honor her." Others echoed similar sentiments. The dead would be honored through the living. The tragedy would be remembered by building something better from the ruins. The sorrow would be transformed, not eliminated, into determination, connection, and yes, eventual joy. Children played at the edges of the gathering. A group of teenagers had started a game, their laughter ringing out across the plaza. Some adults looked scandalized at first, then slowly smiled. Life continued. That was the point. As the night wore on, someone brought out a guitar. Music filled the air. Some humans danced, slowly at first, then with more energy. Others sat and ate and talked. A few had left to grieve privately, and that was respected too. But most stayed, drawn together by invisible threads of shared experience. Ara moved through the crowd, conducting careful interviews. She asked humans to explain what they were feeling. Their answers varied in wording but carried the same essential truth. "I'm devastated and grateful at the same time," one woman said. "Devastated that I lost my sister, grateful that I had her for 30 years. It hurts so much, but being here with everyone makes it hurt less, a man explained. Like we're carrying the weight together instead of alone. We're not pretending it didn't happen, a teenage girl said. We're just refusing to let it be the only thing that happened. An elderly woman took Ara's hand, studying her with kind eyes. You're trying to understand us, aren't you? You think we're strange. I think you're remarkable, Ara admitted. My people don't grieve this way. When someone dies, we retreat. We process alone. The idea of celebrating while mourning seems impossible. The woman nodded slowly. It is impossible in a way, but humans have always done impossible things. We learned a long time ago that if you only allow yourself to feel one emotion at a time, you miss out on the fullness of being alive. Yes, I'm sad tonight. I lost my grandson, but I'm also grateful to be here with my neighbors. I'm also proud of how we're coming together. I'm also hopeful about rebuilding. All of those feelings are true at the same time. Doesn't that make everything confusing? Ara asked. Sometimes, the woman admitted, but it also makes everything richer. The joy is because we know sorrow. The sorrow is bearable because we know joy. They need each other. Ara thanked her and moved on, but the words echoed in her mind. They need each other. In psychology, emotions were discrete states to be managed individually. The idea that contradictory emotions could not only coexist but enhance each other was revolutionary. She found David sitting alone at the edge of the plaza, looking up at Earth through the dome. She approached cautiously. I saw you interviewing people, he said without looking at her. You're studying us. Yes, Ara admitted. I'm a psychologist. My people wanted to understand how humans process grief. And what have you learned? Ara sat beside him. That I don't understand anything as well as I thought I did. David smiled slightly. My husband, he used to say that humans are messy. We feel everything all at once and somehow make it work. He was a scientist too, botanist. He would have liked that we're planning memorial gardens. I'm sorry for your loss, Ara said, using the human phrase she'd learned. Thank you, but I'm also grateful for the love. Does that make sense? I wouldn't trade the pain away if it meant I never had him. The grief is the price of love, and he was worth it. They sat in silence for a while, watching humans below continue their impossible celebration of sorrow and joy intertwined. We're going to be okay, David said eventually. It doesn't feel like it right now, but we will be, because we'll carry this together. That's the secret, I think. Humans learned we're not meant to bear things alone. Ara thought of her own people, processing grief in isolation, and wondered if they had gotten it wrong all along. Part 3. 2 months after the Mars earthquake, Ara stood before the Galactic Psychological Institute's council. The chamber held representatives from 47 species, each a leading expert in their field. The amphitheater design allowed all to see the central presentation platform where she now stood. Holographic displays floated around her, ready to show her findings. Honored council members, she began. I present the findings of our Earth study with a request that you set aside preconceptions. What humans do challenges every psychological model we've developed over thousands of years of research. Council member Alike Thane spoke first. We've reviewed your preliminary reports, Dr. Ara. Your data is thorough, but your conclusions are impossible. No species can experience contradictory emotions simultaneously without psychological damage. Yet humans do, Ara replied calmly. She activated the first hologram, showing neural scans of humans during celebrations of loss. These scans were taken during a funeral with elements of joy. Notice the simultaneous activation of brain regions associated with sorrow and pleasure. They're not alternating. They're both active at once. Murmurs rippled through the council. Several members made gestures of disbelief. We believe you may be misinterpreting the data, said council member, a empath. Perhaps humans simply switch rapidly between emotional states, too quickly for standard observation to detect. I thought that too, Sora spoke up from beside Ara. As a herself, her testimony would carry weight. But I was there. I felt their emotional signatures directly. It's not switching, it's fusion. They've somehow learned to blend emotions that should cancel each other out. Ara pulled up video footage from the Mars gathering. This colony suffered a devastating earthquake, 47 dead, hundreds injured, infrastructure destroyed. Watch what they did just 3 days later. The council watched in silence as humans gathered, shared food, told stories, cried, laughed, and planned for the future. Ara had edited the footage carefully to show the full spectrum of human response. This is denial, insisted. They're avoiding the reality of their loss. Are they? Ara activated another display, showing psychological assessments of Mars colonists taken 1 week, 1 month, and 2 months after the tragedy. Humans who participated in these celebrations showed faster recovery rates, lower incidence of complicated grief, and better overall mental health outcomes compared to humans who isolated themselves. The ones who celebrated healed better than the ones who grieved alone. That contradicts established trauma theory, another council member said. Yes, it does, Ara agreed. Which means our trauma theory is incomplete. We've studied hundreds of species, but we've never encountered one that processes loss through communal celebration. We assumed our models were universal. We were wrong. She pulled up her next piece of evidence. Let me show you something else. This is footage of various human celebrations across their planet. Notice the pattern. The display showed birthday parties where humans acknowledged aging and mortality while celebrating life. Retirement ceremonies where they mourned lost identity while honoring achievement. Graduation events where they grieved the end of one chapter while celebrating the beginning of another. Memorial days for war dead marked with festivals. Funerals that became parties. Every human culture does this, Ara explained. The specific rituals vary, but the underlying principle is universal among them. They refuse to let sorrow exist in isolation. They give it context, community, and purpose. But why? Asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. What evolutionary pressure would create this adaptation? Ara had been waiting for this question. Humans evolved as social creatures in a harsh environment. Their planet tried to kill them regularly. Predators, disease, natural disasters, resource scarcity. Early humans who grieved alone often didn't survive. But those who maintained social bonds through grief, who shared their sorrow while still functioning as a group, those were the ones who passed on their genes. She pulled up comparative data. Look at human history. They've faced multiple extinction-level events, supervolcano eruptions, ice ages, plagues that killed half their population. And every time they recovered faster than models predicted. We thought they were just lucky, but it wasn't luck. It was this. The display showed footage of humans rebuilding after disasters throughout their history. After wars, they held victory celebrations while still mourning their dead. After plagues, they gathered in thanksgiving while remembering the lost. After natural disasters, they organized community festivals while the rubble still smoldered. They transformed trauma into connection, Ara continued. The celebration becomes a container that's large enough to hold both grief and hope. It acknowledges the past while reaching toward the future. And most importantly, it's communal. They don't make anyone carry sorrow alone. Thane, who had remained skeptical throughout the study, finally spoke up. Even if this is effective for humans, it doesn't mean it would work for other species. Our psychology is different. Is it? Ara challenged gently. Or have we simply never tried? The process grief through isolation because that's our tradition. But has anyone ever studied whether that's actually optimal? Or is it just what we've always done? Silence fell over the council chamber. Ara could see she had struck a nerve. Traditions were powerful things, especially among long-lived species who had practiced them for. She softened her tone. I'm not saying humans have the only answer. I'm saying they have an answer we've never considered. And given that they show better recovery rates from trauma than most species in the galactic community, perhaps it's worth investigating whether we could learn from them. Council member Vex, an elderly who had been silent until now, raised a hand. You're suggesting we change how we grieve, how we process loss. These are fundamental aspects of our cultures. I'm suggesting we at least explore the option, Ara replied. Science advances when we challenge our assumptions. For thousands of years, we've assumed that grief and joy were incompatible. Humans prove they're not. What else might we be wrong about? She activated her final display. I propose a series of controlled experiments, small groups from various species attempting human-style communal grief processing. If it helps, we expand. If it doesn't, we've lost nothing but time. But if humans are right, if we've been making our own grief harder by insisting on isolation, wouldn't we owe it to ourselves to find out? The council members looked at each other. Ara could see doubt, curiosity, and resistance warring in their expressions. There's one more thing, Sora added quietly. I attended these human celebrations. I felt what they felt. And for the first time in my life, despite feeling their overwhelming grief, I didn't want to run away from it. The joy mixed with the sorrow made it bearable. It made it feel meaningful instead of just painful. If an empath can tolerate grief when it's processed the human way, perhaps there's real value here. Studied her fellow with interest. You're saying the human method makes grief less overwhelming. No, Sora corrected. It makes grief just as intense, but it also makes it shareable, and sharing it somehow makes it survivable. The council went into deliberation. Ara and her team were dismissed to wait outside the chamber. Hours passed. Ara paced the corridor, her dorsal ridges twitching with nervous energy. Whatever happens, you did good work, Sora said encouragingly. Did I? Ara wondered. Or did I just waste the council's time trying to force human psychology onto species it doesn't fit? You followed the data where it led, Sora replied. That's what good scientists do. Finally, they were called back. Council member Vex spoke for the group. Dr. Ara, the council has reviewed your findings. We agree they are compelling, if troubling. We are approving your proposed experiments with one condition. You will lead them. You will design careful protocols to test whether human celebration methods can be adapted to other species. You will monitor for any adverse effects, and you will report back to us in one standard year. Relief flooded through Ara. Thank you, I won't disappoint you. See that you don't, Vex said, but his tone was not unkind. You're asking us to reconsider how we understand grief itself. That's not a small thing. Over the following months, Ara organized the experiments. She started small, with volunteers from each species willing to try something new. The first attempt was a gathering to honor their dead. Instead of isolated silence, they came together. They shared memories aloud. They prepared food. They even, hesitantly, included music. It was awkward at first, weren't accustomed to public displays of emotion, but slowly something shifted. One woman began to cry while telling a story about her deceased partner. Instead of being shamed for it, others moved closer, offering physical comfort. Someone else shared a memory that made the group laugh. The laughter felt wrong at first, almost sacrilegious, but then it felt right. By the end of the gathering, participants reported feeling lighter, not because their grief had disappeared, but because they no longer carried it alone. Similar experiments occurred across other species, held communal mourning ceremonies, organized memorial festivals. Each species adapted the human principles to fit their own cultural context. The results were remarkable. Across species, participants showed improved grief recovery rates. Social bonds strengthened. The fear of loss became less paralyzing because the knowledge of communal support made tragedy more bearable. Ara documented everything carefully. She noted failures too. Some species found the human method too uncomfortable, preferring their traditional approaches. That was fine. The goal was never to replace all methods of grieving, but to offer an alternative. 1 year later, she returned to the council with her findings. The data spoke clearly. Human-style celebration could be adapted across species with significant benefits. The key insight, Ara explained, is that humans don't transform sorrow into joy. They create space for both emotions to coexist. The celebration doesn't erase the pain. It gives the pain context, meaning, and community, and that makes all the difference. The Council authorized the publication of her research as The Human Paradox: Alchemy of Emotion. The paper spread throughout the galactic community. Some species rejected it outright, others cautiously experimented, a few embraced it fully. Ara received messages from across the galaxy. A mother thanked her for helping organize a memorial for her son that included joy instead of just pain. A man wrote that, after attending a human-style gathering, he finally felt like his grief had purpose. But the message that touched her most came from David on Mars. The colony had rebuilt. The memorial gardens bloomed with flowers engineered to survive in the thin Martian atmosphere, and they had just celebrated the first annual Resilience Day. Dr. Ara, his message read, "Thank you for seeing us, not just observing us but really seeing us. You helped us understand ourselves better too. Would have loved that his death contributed to something bigger than his own life. That's what celebration does. It transforms private tragedy into shared meaning. I hope your people find the same peace we have." Ara sat in her office on the Institute's home world, reading the message again. Through her window, she could see others walking past. Some were heading to a newly established community grief center, where they would gather to remember their dead together instead of alone. Change came slowly to long-lived species, but it came. She thought about the human grandmother who had told her that grief was the price of love. She thought about the Mars colonists dancing through their tears. She thought about how humans had taught the galaxy something profound, that the opposite of sorrow wasn't joy. They could exist together. They should exist together. Because life was never just one thing. It was complex, contradictory, and messy. And humans, beautiful messy humans, had figured out how to celebrate all of it. Ara opened her personal journal and wrote one final note. "Today I attended my first celebration of remembrance. We gathered in the traditional Hall of Silence, but this time we weren't silent. We spoke our dead's names aloud. We shared meals, and yes, we even laughed. It felt strange. It felt uncomfortable. It felt absolutely right. The humans were correct. We were never meant to carry our sorrows alone." She closed the journal and smiled, feeling the warm weight of bittersweet emotion in her chest. Sadness and gratitude existing together. It was impossible. It was human. And now it was becoming universal.